Yeah, get in there, kitty. Dominate those cookies.
Hello everyone. In this video, I want to talk about Visual Studio Code and show you some of my favorite features. Now, since I'm fairly new to VS Code myself, this is not going to be an exhaustive tutorial. This is more of just a show and tell, where I share the features that I was pleasantly surprised by. Now, we are only going to cover 1% of what this editor is capable of, but if you're looking for a new text editor, I think this video might help you get excited enough to actually make a move and try something new. Now, before we begin, I just want to stress that this editor is completely free. Just Google for Visual Studio Code to download and install it. It's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and it won't cost you a penny. Okay, now without further ado, let's get started. So first, let's imagine you're writing a bit of HTML, and you want to create a bulleted or unordered list. Now, a lot of text editors have basic tab completion, where you can just type UL and then hit tab on your keyboard, and it will generate the tags for you. However, VS Code takes this about 10,000 steps forward by including a package named emmet. Let me show you what emmet can do. So if we have an unordered list, we probably want a list item inside it. But check this out. You can just type unordered list, look inside that with greater than symbol, type li, then hit tab, and it will generate that structure with the nested element for you. Emmet can even go beyond that. So imagine we want a list with 5 list items. Unordered list, go inside that, list item, times or asterisk, 5, hit tab, you're off to the races, and you can even tab through each item. So red, hit tab again, orange, tab, yellow, you get the idea. Not only does it generate the nested structure for you, but you can just type and then keep hitting the tab key on your keyboard. Now, the emmet tool that makes this possible is available in other text editors, but I just think it's cool that VS Code includes emmet by default right out of the box. So we don't need to go and download a plugin or an extension or a package. We just have immediate access to the power of emmet. Now, you could create an hour-long video just on emmet, but this is a video about VS Code, not emmet in particular, so I want to keep things rolling. Let me just show you one more emmet HTML trick before we move on. Let me start over. Let's say I want to create a div with a class of featured item. So div, and then to give it a class is dot. If you want to give it an ID, you could use hashtag, but div dot featured item. And then inside this div, maybe I want a heading level 1, and below that heading, I want a paragraph. And maybe below that paragraph, I want a heading level 2. The idea here is that you can use the plus symbol to string together multiple sibling elements. So if I hit tab, we get a div with our class, and we get all of the children elements that we wanted. Now, there is a lot more to emmet than what we've covered here, but I want to keep things rolling. Okay, that's enough HTML for now. Let's imagine we want to write a bit of CSS. Emmet can actually help us here as well. So within this rule, let's imagine I want to add a declaration that says padding 10 pixels. So on a new line here, instead of typing all of that out, I can just type P for padding and then 10. So P10, hit tab on my keyboard, and emmet knows what I mean. Now, maybe you don't want to use pixels. Maybe you want to use rem. So check this out. You could just say P, and imagine you want 1.5 rem. So P 1.5 R, hit tab, it can read our mind. Now, these fuzzy search shortcuts are available for just about anything you could think of. For example, let's imagine we want margin bottom 1 rem. MB for margin bottom, 1 rem. Hit tab. What if you want text align center? TA for text align, center, hit tab, you're in business. Now, there's no point in trying to memorize these or study some cheat sheet. The whole idea is that it's very intuitive. I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, if you just type in an abbreviation of whatever you're thinking of, it will know what you're trying to do. Okay, now let's move past Emmet and talk about another VS Code feature. And that is the way that it handles color. So within CSS, if I want to set the color for this rule, color, and then if you include any value here, whether it's a keyword for a color or a hexadecimal or RGBA, if you hover over it, it's going to give you an inline color picker. So you can choose whatever color you want. And if you click on this area right here, that lets you switch between RGB, hex, HSL, you get the idea. And obviously this would also work for background color. I won't bore you with that, but it also works with shorthand. So if you want to add a border 1 pixel solid red, you can see the color preview appears right there, and if you hover over it, you can choose a new color. Okay, now the next Visual Studio Code feature that I want to highlight, if I switch to this different file, is that it has built-in support for sassy CSS. Now I know that the Atom text editor also has built-in support for Sass, but for example with Sublime Text, you have to install a package or plugin for the editor to understand the sassy syntax. So I just think it's cool that VS Code ships with this by default. So you can set variables, you can use nested rules, you can create mix-ins, and the editor is not going to throw any errors or think that your syntax is weird. Cool. Now let's change gears from CSS and talk a little bit about JavaScript. In particular, let's talk about React and JSX. So if I switch to this new tab, here we can see an example of a React component, and within render you want to return a bit of JSX. Now within this JSX, it would be nice if we could use emmet tab triggers. Right? So maybe I want an unordered list, and inside that a list item, hit tab, but that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because at the moment, if you look in the bottom right hand corner, the syntax for this file is just regular JavaScript. However, if you click on that syntax, and then up here if you type in React, you can see we can choose a syntax called JavaScript React. Now as soon as I select that, you can see that it's being used down here. Now the editor is going to be aware that we are within the context of JSX. So now our emmet tab triggers will work. So I could say ul list item tab, cool, right? And all of the other things you can do with emmet HTML, you can now do within your React component JSX. I know this is available in other text editors, but I just think it's cool that it works out of the box in Visual Studio Code. I didn't need to go and download a plugin or a package. It just works. Okay, now changing gears, the next VS Code feature I want to talk about is its integrated command line. So for example, if I jump into this next file I have, here we've got a bit of JavaScript. I've got a constant that contains a string. And maybe I want to validate this and check to see if this is actually an email address or not. So I'd probably want to use the handy package on npm named validator. And to install an npm package, you're probably going to want your command line or your terminal. Now there's no need to jump to a separate program or window. Within Visual Studio Code, you can just click View and then Integrated Terminal. Now there is a keyboard shortcut as well, but that's going to be slightly different depending on your operating system. But once you click on that, then down here within Visual Studio Code, we've got our regular operating system command line. Now if you're just working within an individual file, the command line is going to open up to the root of your computer. And that's not what we want. We want our command line to be pointing to the same directory that this file that we're working on lives in. Now, instead of going down to the command line and trying to cd into the exact directory that you want, check this out. If I close this Visual Studio Code window, and we can just open an entire folder with Visual Studio Code. So you can either drag a folder on top of the program, or use the program's file open and choose a folder. And when we do that, we can see that we have this Explore view with all of the files in that folder. And if I jump into my test.js file, and now that I'm working with a project or a folder instead of just a single file, now if I open up my integrated command line, cool, you can see that VS Code automatically pointed the command line towards this current folder. So I can just run npm install validator. Cool, you can see that created the node modules folder. Then back in my file, maybe up at the top here, I will pull in that package. So const validator equals, and then just require it in. So require validator. And now I promised there was a reason I made you watch all of that. So check this out. Maybe down here, I want to use the validator package, and I know that it contains a method that can check to see if a string of text is an email address or not. However, maybe I can't remember the exact name of the method. So what I can do is just say validator dot to look inside it, and then VS Code will show me a list of all of its methods. And if I don't feel like scrolling through the list, I can instead just say validator dot and just start typing in the word email, and then VS Code will show me a list of all the methods that contain that word. Cool, so then I can say, yep, its name is email, run that method, and pass it my constant, right? So the email. And I just think that feature is super cool. Instead of having to go to my web browser and look up the documentation for this package, VS Code will just look inside it for me and show me my options. Now, I know a lot of IDEs can do this, but usually I prefer minimalist text editors over an IDE. And I think that's why VS Code is so cool. It's an IDE that's sort of masquerading as a minimalist text editor. So it sort of feels like the best of both worlds. Now, speaking of IDEs, we might want to debug or test this code. So first, this isEmail method is going to return either true or false. So why don't we console.log that? So at the beginning of this line, console.log. And now if I want to run or test this code, my first option is to pretend that I'm using a minimalist text editor. So down in my command line, I could just run node and then the name of this file, right? Now you need to have node installed on your computer to do this, but you can see false. And if I change this string of text to actually look like an email address, and then run it again in the command line, you can see it returns true. Cool, so our code is working. However, in VS Code, you don't need to manually run node in the command line. Remember, we just said that VS Code is basically an IDE, meaning it has integrated debugging. So up in your menu bar for VS Code, you can click on debug, and you've got all of the traditional debugging tools. That's actually what this button in the left-hand sidebar is. If you click on that, it opens up this debug section, and you can see useful information like call stack and your breakpoints. And you can typically find the debugging console right next to the link to see your terminal or command line. Cool, and aside from testing Node, I've actually heard that you can directly debug from within Google Chrome, so front-end JavaScript. The last I heard is that you need to download a plugin or an extension to get that to work, so I'm not going to cover that in this video, but maybe that's something you want to look into. Okay, now changing gears, one of the final aspects of VS Code that I want to cover is its native Git or version control integration. For a quick example of this, let me begin by turning the current folder I'm in into a Git repo. So I will jump into my command line, and you can always run git init to turn the current folder into a repo. This is of course assuming you have Git installed on your computer. Okay, and then if you're like me, you usually use the command line to run git status and to add the different files to your staging area, to make commits, and then ultimately push your changes up to a remote repo. Well, in VS Code, you don't need to use the command line to do any of that. So I can actually hide my command line, and this icon in the left-hand sidebar is where you can manage your repo. So if I click on that, it's going to show me all of my changes. Now, since this is a brand new repo that I just initialized, on this first commit, it's going to consider every file a change. Now just for the sake of this video, let's imagine that the only file we want to add into version control or to the Git repo is our test.html file. So if you hover over that, you can click this plus symbol to add that to staging. Okay, and then this area will show you what you've staged so far. So what we just did is the equivalent of going to the command line and typing git add test.html. Let's imagine that's the only thing I want to add to staging, and now I'm ready to commit this. So up in this message box, I can type in my commit message. First commit, including the home page. And then you can click this check mark towards the top to commit. Cool, so now that HTML file is in version control. So if I click this top icon to go back to Explore mode and open up the HTML file, let's make a couple sample changes to it. So maybe change the title to hello. And in the body area, maybe I will add a bulleted list. Hi, hey, hello, bye. Now, as soon as I save that, Git is going to recognize that this file has been modified since the last commit. And now check this out. If I use this icon in the sidebar to jump to source control, within this list of changes, if I find that HTML file, here it is, I can double click on that and it's going to show me a side-by-side diff. And if you scroll, they're both in sync. Now this is a standard Git feature, but it's really cool to have instant access to a visualization of it. It's going to highlight exactly what you changed. You can review this really quick before you stage or commit. I think it's super useful. Let's imagine I'm happy with this. So I can click the plus symbol here to add that file to staging. Cool, I've just got the one file in the staged area. Let me add a commit message. Updated homepage. Click the commit check mark. Cool. And if you've got a remote repo set up like GitHub or Bitbucket, you can just click on these three dots and that gets you instant access to push and pull. And once you actually set up your local repo to a remote, you will also have an additional icon down here towards the bottom left corner. It will be sort of a synchronize button that will automatically push and pull when necessary. When it comes to Git branches, you can always see the branch that you've currently checked out in the bottom left corner. And if you click on that, you can cycle through any of your branches, or you can create a new branch without having to jump to the command line. If you want to merge one branch into another, just open up your command palette. But what in the world is a command palette? Well, up in the menu bar for VS Code, if you click on View, you can then click Command Palette. Most people never actually click on this because instead they just memorize the keyboard shortcut that's listed here. Now, this generic command palette has nothing to do with Git in particular. In fact, the command palette is how you can do pretty much anything within VS Code. So if you ever want to learn more about this editor, just open up the command palette and you can just scroll for seemingly forever through all of the features that are at your disposal. Or you can just start typing what you're looking for. So if I type in merge, that will show me the commands that include the word merge, and there you can see there is a git merge branch option. Now that's going to end this section where we talk about Git. Now let's finish out the video by just talking about the command palette in general for a moment. It's a really neat feature because if you just memorize the one keyboard shortcut to open it, you don't need to worry about memorizing any other shortcuts right away. So for example, let's imagine the indentation in your file gets messed up, right? And you're wondering if VS Code can help you and fix the indentation. Just open up your command palette, search for reindent. You can see there's a command, reindent lines, push enter. You're back in business. And VS Code has all sorts of features like this that you can find in the command palette. You can have it auto-indent for you. You can change the language or syntax without having to click with your mouse. You can go into a full screen Zen mode. You can compare different files even outside the context of a Git repo. So you can compare the current file with your clipboard, compare the file with another file. There are all sorts of different features, and I think this is a good place to end the video because you can just look through the command palette, experiment, and see what catches your eye. Anytime you can keep your hands on your keyboard instead of needing to reach for your mouse or trackpad, that is a productivity boost. It's little things like that that let you become a more efficient developer. Anyways, that's going to bring this video to a close. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're excited to try out VS Code, and until next time, take care. If you enjoyed this video, you might be interested in my premium courses. My newest one is titled Become a WordPress Developer, and a big focus in this course is learning about the WordPress REST API. This lets us use front-end JavaScript to control the back-end CRUD operations of WordPress. I have another course that's focused on Git, GitHub, workflow tools like NPM, Webpack, Babel. We learn how to write modular, object-oriented JavaScript. We learn about mobile-first performance and mobile-first responsive design. We cover BEM to keep our CSS organized, and a whole lot of other topics. I have another course that is 100% focused on learning HTML and CSS, and the last course has nothing to do with coding. It's simply how to create a website with WordPress without digging into the code. So this is great for beginners. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.